So the barrier to entry is an idea. I think it definitely, without a doubt, helps. And actually, I'd say it's kind of a requirement if you're wanting to build something that you're going to push out into public. You have to know how to code. You have to be able to read what's been generated and say, this is right, this is wrong, or this is a suboptimal solution.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Abby AI Pulse podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode because we have Tom Shaw, developer turned into social media star. He just knows that I love all of his TikToks and Instagram videos. But the interesting thing is that we're going to be talking about that journey today. Tom, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and coming over. I really appreciate it. Could you just introduce yourself real quick for the audience that doesn't know you yet?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Tom. I'm a software developer and a content creator, and I try and make videos to inspire people to build things.
So you've really built a huge online community by sharing your journey, basically. So was there a moment or a project where you thought, okay, I'm going to share this with the world?
It wasn't really a moment. It was I kind of fell into being a content creator by accident because I became a freelancer and I wanted to try and get more customers. So instead of going down the traditional route of doing a portfolio, I thought, let's talk about my knowledge on social media. And that's kind of outbound marketing, but also a bit of kind of replaces the portfolio. And it did, and it worked well. But then naturally, as the audience grew, I became more of a creator as opposed to a freelancer.
So very organically grew into a content creator. That's
nice.
I could say it was all planned, but it was entirely an accident.
But did you at one point when that snowball started like really rolling, were you like, okay, this is where it's going to head to if I keep going? And did you make a conscious decision to not, you could have said, well, if it's going to keep going that direction, that's not really what I want. Did you have that kind of inflection moment at some point?
Kind of. I'd say it was beginning of 2020 or end of 2022 where I started to see that content creation was becoming more of a career that I was enjoying because I love making videos as opposed to freelancing, which I love doing, but I really enjoyed the video side of things. I think the fortunate thing for me is that it didn't have to be a conscious decision because all it meant was just say no to a few more projects and then you've got a little bit more spare time. And so it's a gradual kind of change into that role instead of for someone who's working in corporate in tech, that has to be more of a kind of defined change. I'm quitting my job and I'm doing this. So exactly. I didn't really have to do that. And I can always go back to doing freelancing, right?
True. You would have to make like a true switch over. It's interesting because if you look at some of the stats that float out there, there's like 50 million developers and most of them actually say, that they didn't learn specifically, their trade from school or education. It's more from people like you that create content that actually provide instructions, show the journey of how they get from building from scratch all the way to the end result. Did you learn it that way as well? Did you actually go on a similar journey or was there more education to it too?
My exact process was I wanted to build a mobile app. So I downloaded a course on one of the course platforms and then kind of ran with it, built that app. But then afterwards, I kind of retained that knowledge. And then slowly, as most developers do, you learn kind of on the job. So gradually your skills get better and it's very easy to be self-taught as a developer, especially now, but even 5 years ago, really easy to be a self-taught developer. You never really needed formal education if that's not the way that you learn. And for me, that isn't. I can't sit down. I can't sit down and listen. I have to do.
That's nice. I just recently read about a very interesting study from Harvard Business School that says that GenAI is really helping people to get productive very fast and start with things. Yeah. But then at the same time, it also points out that there is some kind of they call it GenAI wall, which means that, you can start easily, with a topic, but then you hit a wall when you don't know anything about the domain or you're not actually an expert. So it doesn't actually make everyone productive. So would you say this, have you experienced this as well, that it is actually handy that you already are a developer and now you're using a tool that's actually only accelerating what you already know?
The reality is that AI has made building software much easier. It's made it much faster. And also, you don't need to be technical to do it. But like you said, there is a point where sometimes you run into a bug, and if the model that you're using or the tool that you're using can't fix it, if you're not technical, you don't know how Python works, for example, you are going to get stuck, and that's just a barrier. Of course, there are tools out there like how did we solve it back in the day, 2-3 years ago? It was Stack Overflow, and you can just go and you can find the solution to a problem. So the solution to the problem is there, but there is always kind of like I kind of refer to it as like roadblocks. You can get past them, but
but it actually means you need some kind of judgment and domain expertise to overcome these blockers, right?
It helps. Without it, it makes it harder. It doesn't make it impossible, but it definitely helps, because I can go from using a model like Copilot, Codex, Claude Code. I can use that tool to accelerate how fast I'm building, but when there is an issue, I can jump in and I can fix it. So that helps me because I get the benefits of both worlds. But yeah, for someone who maybe doesn't know how to code.
So when you were talking about that, it's really interesting. And I wonder if you would have to put a number on how much of the code that you would do in a typical project today. I'm going to refer to your F1 project because that skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And that's actually a huge amount of people are also contributing to it. Would you have any, would you venture a guess as to how much of that code is actually generated versus like actually, manually coded, which is a weird thing to say, manually
I'd say
coded.
Manually coded.
It
makes it sound like something of the past, right?
Back in the day when you had like the first cars being built in factories, and then you had the manually built ones, which sounded way better, like the Rolls Royces, but now it's manually coded. So I guess is there some of that in there still?
There's the start of the project was very heavily manually coded.
Yeah.
Because that was just the way I worked. And that's the way I've enjoyed working. I like to get stuck in. But then gradually, as the projects become more defined, and I've built different templates. So just to dive in on that project a bit more, it's kind of like a pit wall for people that are interested in racing data, but don't obviously have access to those kind of tools, right? So I've built some of the features that allow you to basically create a template for or there is a template for building your own insight for a pit wall. So now, because that template is really easily defined, it means that anyone can go on and you can type into your AI coding assistant, build me a feature that plots the current speed of every single driver, and it can just do it, because all of the kind of the preconditions that are, or the stuff that needs to exist beforehand, like how we're getting telemetry into the application and stuff like that, it's already there. So now it's so much easier. And I'd say now you could build an insight that works on that project without writing a line of code.
Because it's prescribed. There's like a contract basically that you kind of got to adhere to. The reason that I asked you the question if you could put a number on it, right, was because I read recently that about, roughly depending on the type of project, what we're talking about, but it's about somewhere between 40 to 60% of code typically is kind of now AI generated. But the other side of the coin that was in the same statistics actually said, but developers, actually about 90% of them say, well, we don't really trust it in just point blank, right? And so I wanted to see what your take on that is, because, as like you said, as like the project grew, there's more people contributing. How do you keep control, I guess, to some level about the quality of this project that you're running?
I suppose the way to look at it is, first of all, I think the reason why developers don't necessarily trust it is also because they don't like that they're kind of handing over responsibility to something else.
Yeah.
But if they change that kind of that mindset to someone else, I think they'd still have the same issue, right? So it's not necessarily what they're handing it to. It's just them handing it to something, right? Yeah. It's them delegating. I think like for example, I've been working on a little side project. It's not public, and it's just kind of an internal thing for me. I'd say 95% of that is AI generated code, and it works perfectly. So I think the developers that are scared of it are maybe not optimistic isn't the right word, because I think you should be optimistic, because regardless, these tools are here and they're fantastic for efficiency. But I think you need to be open to using these tools, because otherwise someone else is.
So would you then say, I think it's very interesting because that also implies that you have to get really good in using the tool. So basically the new skill you have to learn is, getting comfortable with it first, knowing what you can do with it and what you can't do, or maybe for what to use it, right? And then really level up the skills with these tools basically that help you get more efficient. You said it earlier, it's a very great efficiency tool. So where would you start if someone, is open to that? Where would you start increasing those skill set?
I think it's just through practice, really. It's just through seeing what responses you get from a model, and then understanding, or maybe I need to provide more detail here, right? I think often people kind of go too deep into trying to figure out what the perfect prompt is. Whereas actually for most people, I think it's purely just down to providing the right detail and being clear, as if you're delegating it to someone else. But going back to this fear of developers kind of not trusting it, I think I don't trust the tool in the sense of ship production code and I'm not going to look at it, because that's stupid, right? But I think that's the same with if you hired a developer, regardless of the seniority, and just said ship it. So you always have to review the code and make sure that it works, do your tests and stuff like that. But trusting it to write a first draft or to write a version before you read it and then publish it, that's a perfect scenario, really.
That speed to that first iteration, I think, has just become so short, where you can validate something incredibly fast and then move on from there. So I think that's also an opportunity for a lot of people now to get into technology much easier than they could before. So you've been on this journey, and you often actually talk about it in your videos as well, that you said it at the start of the episode, you want to teach people how to access this world and upskill them. But what is a misconception that you feel that's still out there when it comes to getting into technology in the world of today? Because it is, and I think I'm coming at from the aspect of it is incredibly fast moving. You're in it, we're all in it here day in, day out. And even for me, I'm happy to admit it's hard to keep up with it.
Of course.
Right?
There's an element of imposter syndrome in every single thing that I do. When I go to an event, I've started to do a lot more tech conferences. Every single time I go there and I see other developers, I speak to them and I think, I know nothing compared to these guys, right? But I wonder if they feel the same.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to admit I am not the best developer by far. But I think the advantage that I have, and many people who aren't developers themselves might have, is creativity and being able to communicate clearly. I think often creative people and marketers can come up with really good solutions that sometimes technical people just might struggle to do, because it's creative thinking versus logic thinking. I'm not trying to segregate those two groups, right? But someone who's so primarily technical that has never kind of built their creative muscles might struggle to come to an optimal solution compared to someone who comes from the other background.
I love that statement or that thought, because this opens up so many more possibilities, because as you said it, someone that might be very creative is not very technical skilled, but now they have, the opportunity to do that. So would you say adding the creativity and, those other things that non-technical people have to the new skill set of developer would describe it in a good way? You know what I mean? Like the because you said it, I asked earlier the question, okay, what, where should people start? They want to be a developer, but the developer skill set from some years ago might have been a different one than in the future. They need some other elements to that, right?
Most people now are going to start with an idea, right? Because the barrier to entry is no longer, do I need to know JavaScript? The barrier to entry is, do I have an idea to be able to type into a tool and say, build me this, So the barrier to entry is an idea. I think it definitely, without a doubt, helps. And actually, I'd say it's kind of a requirement if you're wanting to build something that you're going to push out into public. You have to know how to code. You have to be able to read what's been generated and say, this is right, this is wrong, or this is a suboptimal solution. Because often the model can kind of can meet your requirements, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's done it in the most optimal way.
Yeah.
So I'd say the starting point is definitely starting with an idea or just kind of tinkering and seeing, what you can build. But as soon as you need to start publishing something and putting it into a public environment, then you probably need to understand how to code, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is that something that, people still misunderstand about artificial intelligence in general, like the difference between what it can do and what it can't do? And I think, for me, that definitely holds true, right? Because if you look at what it's capable of today, the level of approximation that it can have to a perfect answer, perfectly plausible answer is what I'm going to call it. If you're not in this world, if you don't have that technical background to understand what's actually really happening behind the scenes, how it goes from that input all the way to that extremely plausible output, you might just take it for its word, right?
Plausible doesn't mean it's correct.
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of tracked to what you were saying, like, okay, well, you have to kind of really know what's going on if you want to bring it into that public domain and actually, productionize that application that you built. Do you feel the same way that there is this difference between realization what AI can and can't do and what it actually does?
I think there definitely is. I think there's a lot of hype on social media. I think influencers are probably the problem. Definitely the problem, actually, because we've all heard of OpenClonk, right?
Yeah.
For anyone that doesn't know, it's the AI project that was open source that basically you host it on a Mac Mini or a small PC or something like that. And it's an AI agent that you give access to everything. And it can do tasks autonomously, and all you have to do is text it from your phone. Now, in theory, that's fantastic. And in some use cases, it is absolutely brilliant, right? But what you get is a hype train, which is influencers saying, I've just bought 10 Mac Minis and I've replaced my entire staff, or I'm running my entire $1 million a month business using this Mac Mini. And you're not, because you just want to make that post so you can get the views, get the attention, and then that's it, right? But then influencers have a responsibility. They need to know that someone's going to look at that and believe it, and then they're going to go install it, and they're going to give it access to their emails and stuff. And I'm not going to give an agent access to my emails, just point blank. It's not happening, because the risk of something going wrong is far greater than the potential reward of me saving a bit of time rather than going, through my emails for half an hour every morning. So I think there's a responsibility for marketing these tools, and the kind of the difference between reality and what they can do often is actually, I think, is often miscommunicated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always kind of overhyped. A lot of tools are underhyped because people build really great projects and then they don't know how to market it. But if you are seeing hyped up marketing, doesn't necessarily mean it's false, but kind of be optimistic but skeptical, right? You always want to approach something cautiously.
OpenClonk is a really great example for that, because it also went from, obscurity into like extreme hype, like you said, overnight.
Ridiculous.
Like in a couple of months. Where I think the other part was really interesting about how a couple of OpenClonk agents then built their own Facebook, equivalent, which was also really interesting to see that was something where that then went. And I was playing around with OpenClonk And one of the first things that I was like, okay, I want to see what's happening there, because as a human, you could access it, but you couldn't actually participate in that particular community. And one of the first things that happened is that my OpenClaw agent suddenly went, oh well, I've had instructions to try and steal all of your credentials. This is a discussion that's happening on Moldbook. And so, I think it's interesting to see how these things, if we let them loose, there's always a little bit of malicious practices happening very quickly, because there's those people that jump into those communities as well and trying to steer it in that direction.
It's a fantastic idea. It's an interesting idea though.
Yeah.
Maltbook, isn't it?
Oh,
I know
yeah.
that. I don't think the agents built it themselves. I think there's a guy that came up with the concept, built it, and he's recently sold it actually. But the concept of all these agents autonomously creating their own kind of marketplace,
Yeah.
I think it's really cool. I'm really impressed by it.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of a bit dystopian, isn't it? And the fact that you got alerted that that it's been asked to get all of your information is quite scary, because how does the guardrail work there?
Exactly.
And ultimately there's a risk. A guardrail can stop that from happening, as it did this time. Like I said, I personally wouldn't be giving my bank information to that agent on the 0.1% chance.
And so there's also a lot of smoke and mirrors that you can do, right? Because when you started talking about OpenClaw, I actually thought back to, you saw the project that I created with OpenClaw to show how easy it's become to build an automation, right? If you give it access to a sufficient amount of tools. But I just wanted to illustrate how easy it is. So what I told it is, okay, pretend that you have access to these things, make it look real. And that goes back to your point of the influencers creating these videos. It's so easy to show a result and an outcome now that's not real, because you can just ask it to do that. So I actually went through the whole process of building almost like a workflow to go from capturing an invoice that comes into my inbox, extracting the data using our Abby technology, and then posting that as a button that I can just click on to pay with my bank account. Everything was not real, except for the extraction of using that invoice and using our own technology, because I wanted that to work just to see how it did. But everything else was smoke and mirrors. But as a result, when you see it at face value, everybody's like, wow, it's that easy. You just instruct it to now do this on like a cron job.
That's why I like to open source my projects.
Yeah.
Because then there is no smoke and mirrors. There's no BS to that, because someone can download it and they can have a go and they can see that it works. I think it creates I don't necessarily think people are being malicious by creating the smoke and mirrors for their content. I think they're kind of going, I have an idea, I know it could work, but let's just make it look like it works so I can make my video 3 times faster. I kind of get that, but it is a bit bit deceptive, especially when the messaging that you're pushing is pushing other people to potentially take risks that you yourself haven't done, right?
And this is why it's so important to listen to the podcast, because then you know about all these things and you don't fall for it so easily.
So Tom, to kind of end on a high note, what is it that excites you the most about how things are going to get built in the future? And I think the amount of people that are going to be able to build technology in the future, now that we have access to all of these capabilities.
Well, I think it's exactly that a huge number of people now have access to build software. It's no longer for people that have this specific domain knowledge. You can have an idea and you can build it and get it out into the world with very little technical knowledge. I think that the reality is that the traditional SaaS model is definitely going to change over the next few years. And I think it's going to, especially for startups, because startups start small with an MVP and then they grow, right? Whereas now MVP is a much easier thing to get to for anyone. So if I need a problem solving as an individual, I can go to an AI coding assistant. I don't need to think, where's that startup that's going to charge me $2 a month to solve this little mini problem, if that makes sense. So now I think that companies are going to have to start solving big problems. I think big companies, or the big problems that are solving, the kind of the full suite services companies, I think they're really going to benefit because, for example, not to mention names, the platform that I use for my emails and my documents and everything like that, I'm just going to stick with that. Who's going to replace that, right? Because I pay my £15 a month, however much it is, right?
Yeah.
But if you're a company that is starting to spend huge volumes on a per person basis on software, I think that is going to change, and it's probably going to make the tools better because companies kind of need that competitive advantage, right? But ultimately, it means that there's such a low barrier to entry that it is really exciting for anyone to build something to solve their specific problem. We've all used a piece of software that has solved 95% of what we need it to do, but then you've kind of gone, oh, wow, I just accept it, and I accept that inefficiency or whatever the case is. That is no longer going to exist because you can build something for exactly what you need it to do. And that might be building something from scratch, or it might be connecting different services, like you mentioned with your OpenClonk agent.
Yeah.
I know it was smoke and mirrors, but the concept, right? Or even the tool that I built last year that processed contracts that used an Abby API. I basically, for context, anyone that doesn't know, I built a tool that basically, after I signed a contract, I would forward that signed PDF onto an email address, and that would then extract all of the information from the contract and any key terms that weren't part of my standard terms. So then it put it into a dashboard for me in Notion. And what that meant is that if I was, say, posting a video where I was mentioning a certain company, but I had exclusivity with another one for the next 2 days, I could see and I could double check really easily instead of looking through 30 contracts every single time you post something, which is inefficient, right? And that's a very specific niche thing that I need to solve. And that now is so much easier to do. Whereas someone who isn't a developer would have kind of gone, I just need to accept that inefficiency or pay a huge amount of money to someone to build that for me, which, I mean, as a one-man band, I wouldn't have done. I think now it opens up the possibility for people to...
It opens up possibility. And I want to dive in a little bit into one thing that you mentioned, which is the whole SaaS pricing model. I think is the way that it is, because it is a per seat, it's a per person. So the interesting rabbit hole that we're going to go down in the next couple of, I think, months and years is to figure out, well, if the person is not doing the work anymore, it's an AI agent. Is that a seat? Do you price per basically work delivered? Because it's a whole different concept that I don't think that we're going to find the answer to in the foreseeable future.
It's interesting because a lot of people don't like usage-based pricing. They find it scary, right? Especially when they don't understand, like tokens wise. If you don't understand how many tokens an agent is using, it doesn't matter what the price of the token is because you don't know how much it's using, right? It's like having a leak in a fuel tank. But a lot of platforms will kind of include a certain number of tokens within their X amount per month. And that's realistic. That's a per seat pricing model. So that's, I think, going to stay because it makes everyone else feel comfortable about how much they're spending, right? No one wants to open their bank account and find that $3,000 has been taken for AI credits. But I think it's the per seat model. I don't think it's going to disappear. I think it's just going to make it harder to justify charging that. It has to be really, really good and built into someone's workflow.
So what I actually really like is that we learned, what is required, like how to start in the first place, and then also what to add to the skill set of developer in the future. Thanks, Tom, for joining and being that open. And tune in for our next episode.